welcome to Lost Gotham TV. This is going to be the first episode in a series reviewing all of the published works of my favorite author, Richard Laymon. I am going to try to keep it brief. I apologize if some of my videos, sometimes they go on a little while, I ramble a little bit. I'm going to try not to do that for these episodes. So, the first book I'm going to be looking at is his first published book. I'm going to try to go chronologically, looking at his books, main novels first. Then I'll be moving on to fastbacks and the chapter books and the short stories. And I'm going to try to help people who either are just discovering Laymon, or maybe they've known about Laymon for a while and they want to find more of his books to read. I'm going to be going as deep as I can and finding, hopefully, copies that I can own. But even if I can't find one to own, I want to share the information with you guys so that maybe you can find it and you can own it, and we can all enjoy this incredible author's work together. Anyway, that being said, I'm going to start with his earliest published novel, which was popular at the time. It was, it was good enough to get him published and get him the opportunity to write further books. Those books didn't do as well, but we'll talk about that later. So his first published book, of course, was The Cellar. And I have a few different copies of this book. I don't own many duplicate copies of his books, largely for financial reasons, but I do pick them up from time to time if I find them used. I kind of rescue them from different places. Sometimes I'll leave them be so that other people can find them and enjoy them. But if it's one that I don't have in my collection and I can afford it, I pick it up and I add it to my collection. And so this is the first British edition of the book. So this was published in August of 1980. And so obviously it is The Cellar. I find the cover interesting. It's got like a little bit of metallic stuff going on with the scratches. I'm going to be putting up some extra covers of it on the screen for you guys, so that I might do that at the end of the video or in between, I don't know. So that depending on what country you're in, your cover may look different. And depending on, you may want to, if you're a serious kind of collector, you might want to search for editions from other countries that have a different cover that maybe you like more. Okay, so this is the 1980 British edition. Okay, I have 3 different versions of this book. So this is a version from 1988, and again, British edition, metallic. His name is in metallic this time. This is probably my favorite. It is the one that I probably saw first and purchased first. This is probably the first one that I read, and so I really like this cover. Nice. I can't remember the cover artist's name. Steve Crisp, I think. I don't see it on here, but it's my favorite cover. And then this is the most recent edition I picked up. This is a recent American edition. I'm going to look real quick for when this was published. 2006. Okay, so this is the 2006 American edition of The Cellar. And again, we have that kind of trademark claw mark. We see that in several editions of this book. All right, so what did I think about The Cellar? Well, a little bit of background information, not too much spoilers. I'm going to try not to have spoilers in here, but so it is the first book of the Beast House Chronicles. Okay, it's technically a quadrilogy. It's a series of 4 books, but the 4th one for me doesn't really count, so I generally think of it in terms of a trilogy. And so Cellar was the first book. It was written, in the late 70s, published 1980. And So, like many of his books, they are a little dated now. I don't remember if any of the newer books feature things like cell phones and things, but you have to keep that in mind reading these books. Even if you pick up the latest edition of the book published in the 2000s, it was written 30, 40 years ago. And so it doesn't have a lot of things in it, and so the horror for some people, especially younger audiences, you have to kind of remember that this stuff happened a long time ago, before a lot of the stuff that you take for granted now was available. You know, people are forever stopping to use cell phones, pay phones, and you know they're looking at maps and things. You know, they're not pulling up Google on their phone and Google mapping things. So yeah, I found these books as a teenager, so I think it's cool. I think younger audiences would hopefully probably like them, but they're going to have to bear in mind that, you know, the technology just was not there. Anyway, I apologize for rambling. Back on track. So the story is about a house which has a kind of a legendary beast that lives in the house, and from time to time kills people who trespass there. And they talk about various reasons throughout the books as to why maybe the police or the government have not gotten involved, as to why this murder house has been allowed to kind of continue and actually become monetized, because the owners of the house actually sell tours of the house. They have almost daily tours where you buy a ticket and they walk you around the house and they tell you about the murders that happened there. And they even have some waxwork dummies of the victims. And that's a big part of the stories. And so that's about as far as I'll go into the general story stuff. And again, trying to keep it free of spoilers. This first book follows a woman and her daughter who are basically fleeing from an abusive husband who has just been released from jail. And this happens in the first chapter, like the first couple of paragraphs, it explains this. So I don't feel it's too spoilery. Okay? The only stuff I'll talk about is going to be very general, very early in the book, or on the back jacket. So it's kind of scary. Like most of his books, there's a high level of sexual content. That should definitely be a disclaimer. Some critics of his complain about the level of sex in his books, but I thought about this a lot before beginning these videos, because he does, you know, how to handle that, how to talk about that criticism of his and my opinion of it. I've read a lot of different authors, and you know, Stephen King has sex and violence and rape in some of his books. You know, you think about Dolores Claiborne and Gerald's Game in particular. They're very intricately linked. You know, there's some crossover there, and you know, there's a lot of sex and violence and rape in there. Recently, my wife and I have been watching the TV series Outlander, which is based on a series of historical romance books, and there's time travel involved, and the TV series is interesting. I haven't read any of the books, but in that, and again, it's a very popular TV series, and not only the main female protagonist in the Outlander series has been raped multiple times. There's several consensual sexual scenes, but then even the main male protagonist was forcibly, violently raped and tortured at one point. And that's a very popular series. You think about Game of Thrones, incredibly popular series, and it's full of rape and murder and death. So I don't really understand why Richard Laymon comes under fire for his use of it in his books. He doesn't use it as a crutch, I don't feel. He doesn't do it for sensationalism or anything like that. He does it. It's part of the story. I find it realistic. The male characters think about sex, the female characters think about sex, and I find that realistic. And that's part of what I enjoy about his books is the realism of them. You know, that being said, the Beast House Chronicles as a whole for me are probably his most far-fetched books. So I'm gonna focus on The Cellar though, and The Cellar introduces the Beast. And again, I don't want to go into too much detail about it. I would like to leave something for new readers to be surprised by. But I find the Beast character to be a little bit far-fetched. You don't get as many details in the first book as you do in subsequent books. But I think it gives you a lot of it in this first book. I enjoyed it. I enjoy pretty much all of his books. It's not definitely not a favorite. It's probably lower on my scale of his books, but other people, for some other people, it's their favorite book and they love the Beast House Chronicles. For me, they got better as they went on. Each book got progressively better. So The Cellar for me is my least favorite of the Chronicles books, and it's one of my least favorites of his books overall. But having reread it recently, I did enjoy it again. You know, I don't. I have not found a book of his that I really did not enjoy. As I get through them, maybe I'll come across one where I'm kind of like, oh, you know what? Yeah, okay, maybe I really didn't like it. But Cellar is definitely a solid book. It was a good beginning to his career, and I think it's definitely a solid read for you guys. There's not really much more to say about it. So again, I went on longer than I intended to. I apologize. So I will wrap it up now on The Cellar. Solid book, definitely worth reading. High on the kind of the rape factor, high on some of the violence factors and stuff. So it should maybe have a little bit of a trigger warning. Rape is a serious subject that should not be taken lightly, and so I definitely understand why some people might want to avoid this book if that is a problem for you. But if rape is a problem for you, then perhaps Richard Laymon as a whole should be avoided because it is a subject that comes up often in his works. Okay, now I kind of bummed myself out. I don't want to dissuade you guys. A lot of his books are really fun. They have great plots, and the Beast House as an idea is a great one, and I really love it. And it's a central thread through all of the books. It's the main core drive of all of the books. So I do recommend reading it. That should be my final word on it. I will let you go, and I will see you next time.